Billionaire CEO's hidden fear exposed, how one inspiring janitor transformed an amazing crisis. Tom used to think the worst part about being a janitor was the long hours on his feet, scrubbing floors while the executives occupied their polished offices above. But now, standing in the shadow of the gleaming glass walls of the 40th floor, a chill crept through him. Panic bubbled in his stomach as he overheard hushed tones discussing a merger that would ripple through the company like a tsunami. He knew the faces behind those closed doors, faces full of ambition, dollars, and dreams, offering scant regard to the lives below. What if their families were shattered? What if kids went without school supplies? The thought crushed him. The guilt weighed heavy. Would he really dare to stand against it? Each day felt like an uphill battle, the weight of responsibility bearing down on him. Watching colleagues bustle around, their laughter filling the hallways while lives were at stake gnawed at him. Tom questioned whether speaking up would condemn him as a nobody, a ghost echoing in a corporate landscape that respected nothing but revenue. He felt small, invisible, but with that smallness also came a flicker of determination. How many more days would he sweep these floors, knowing he could make a difference? Anxiety clawed at him, exposing the truth could cost him his job. But watching injustice was unbearable. Before he could let the fear silence him, Tom's thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice calling for help. It was Rachel, an overworked intern, drowning in spreadsheets. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, fingers trembling over her keyboard. A surge of instinct propelled him to assist her. It was such a simple act, yet, diving into the data alongside her felt electrifying. Numbers turned into patterns, shifting like shapes revealing deeper insights hidden by corporate frivolity. Realization struck perhaps he could do more than mop floors. He had found an unexpected skill, and with it emerged a flicker of ambition. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. But as the merger deadline loomed closer, it wasn't just numbers anymore, it transformed into a countdown. Tension bubbled, knotting in his stomach. He dug deeper, revealing discrepancies that painted a picture far grimmer than he anticipated. There was urgency now. If he didn't act, families were at risk. Then came the defining moment, confronting Richard. The boardroom was poised, whispers ricocheting off the walls. Everything felt surreal. Could he truly represent those overlooked by golden placards and lofty titles? The CEO stood there, seething power but with an unfamiliar restlessness flickering in his eyes as Tom prepared to unleash the truths he'd unearthed. Is this what you want? Tom could feel the eyes upon him, hearts racing, breaths held, doubt melding with purpose. This was the moment, teetering on the edge of a moral precipice, but could he demand justice without losing everything? Would he be silenced by the very system he aimed to expose? The silence stretched like a taut wire, every second laced with uncertainty. The storm was brewing, and Tom had no idea whether he'd emerge victorious or shattered, torn between hope and impending despair. The air in the boardroom felt electric and heavy, each second ticking by morphed into an eternity. Tom could barely discern the faces of those around him, the swirling thoughts in his mind consumed his focus. Was he genuinely ready to challenge a system that had systematically dismissed the lives intertwined beneath its glossy facade? He swallowed hard, the discomfort palpable in his throat, urging him to hesitate. Richard's gaze bored into him, his brow furrowing as if he anticipated Tom's next move. Anxiety wrestled with a burgeoning sense of empowerment, urging Tom to disrobe the illusion of authority. This CEO, so accustomed to commanding respect through wealth and stature, might just be unprepared for dissent from an unexpected source. With a sudden surge of courage, Tom spoke. What you're doing here, with this merger, it's not only about numbers. Families, real people, will suffer. His voice trembled but carried an unmistakable weight. The shift in the room was tangible as murmurs flitted like birds above their heads. He had taken the plunge, there was no going back. The CEO scoffed, but Tom pressed on. This was not merely an act of defiance, it felt like reclaiming agency stripped from him for far too long. You think this will just lead to increased profit margins? You're wrong. Look at the data, hidden beneath the surface are lives shattered by layoffs and cutbacks. He gestured toward the spreadsheets Rachel had shared with him, data that revealed potential fallout orchestrated by the very merger being touted as a success. He felt strength surging within. This was his moment of metamorphosis, propelled by a newfound understanding of his worth. The whispers grew louder, resonating with the truths he unspooled. Richard's tight-lipped expression morphed from aloofness to a frail sense of unease. Was Tom's boldness chipping at the veneer of power the CEO wielded so effortlessly? As the silence thickened, he forced himself to contemplate the deeper implications of what he was advocating for, his colleagues. They were not just names on a balance sheet but human beings, dreamers battling their own realities. Did he really have the guts to confront the implications of corporate greed? In this moment, Tom realized he wasn't alone. He was representing the silent voices, their hopes echoing in his chest like a drumbeat. And just like that, clarity dawned. This was more than just a moment, it was a catalyst for meaningful change. He could disrupt the well-oiled machine, whirring with indifference to the struggles faced by those who cleaned the very floors executives walked upon. It became crucial to expose not only the discrepancies in the numerical digits but the ethical void floating like shadows above their heads. But as Tom stood there, basking in the burgeoning sense of empowerment and righteousness, Richard's voice cut through. You think you have any power here, Tom? You're a janitor, nothing more. The condescension was palpable, a challenge draped in icy disdain. The room pulsed with anticipation, uncertain of how this clash of ideals would play out. Beneath the veneer of confidence, doubt flickered within Tom. Could he navigate the depths of this confrontation? The words hung in the air, binding him with an unseen force, and he realized his journey of transformation was just beginning. The outcome loomed uncertain, yet one thought carved its way to the forefront of his consciousness: he was ready to fight not just for himself, but for the collective hope he now embodied. As the final words landed, a sudden realization hit him: was he truly prepared to face the consequences that could shatter his world forever? The tension in the room thickened, and as he stood grounded, the question lingered: what lay beyond the confrontation that could irrevocably alter both his life and the lives at stake? The weight of Richard's words enveloped Tom, stirring a tempest of emotions that clashed violently within him. Vulnerability warred with determination, the air felt thick with expectations, and the mockery hanging in Richard's tone seemed to reverberate in every corner of the boardroom. He was just a janitor, after all. The truth of that identity gnawed at him, threatening to reduce his courageous act to mere folly. But amidst the turmoil, something deeper simmered: an undeniable resolve that suggested Tom could be more than the role he had been assigned. His throat was dry, but the fire in his belly contrasted sharply with the chill of Richard's disdain. He faced the CEO, not with aggression, but with a poised focus, ready to articulate his thoughts with precision. Being a janitor does not strip me of my humanity or my perspective. I see the faces of those affected by decisions made in this room every day. Each word sliced through the tension like a scalpel, revealing layers of truth that resided not just in his life, but in the lives of his coworkers. As the murmurs around him subsided, Tom felt a shift in the atmosphere. He was no longer just speaking to defend himself, he was wielding language as a weapon, targeting the complacency and greed cloaked in corporate jargon. The more he spoke, the clearer it became that he was stepping onto a battlefield, a space where he could articulate not just his own worth but the silent agony shared by countless others. Richard's expression darkened, and Tom could see the flicker of vulnerability hidden behind the facade of authority. It was a moment to explore: could he push this further? As he considered the possibility, his pulse quickened with daring. What if the power dynamics could be upended? Would Richard's world of money and control falter beneath the weight of humanity? Think about the lives you've disregarded. The layoffs that could dismantle families for the sake of profit margins. Is the bottom line worth more than the people who make this company function? Tom continued, his voice rising with each passing phrase. The questions penetrated the thick shell around Richard, each one crafted to challenge the very foundation of his empire. In that moment, Tom realized he had stepped beyond personal stakes. He was generating a dialogue that could unearth truths lost within spreadsheets and bottom lines. The adrenaline coursing through him became paean to his awakening. Could a janitor really disrupt an entire establishment? The concept seemed absurd, yet the conviction behind his words painted a picture of a new trajectory, one that not only spoke of resistance but of reclamation. And then it happened. The silence broke. A soft gasp resonated, followed by nods from a few of his co-workers in the room, their eyes gleaming with appreciation and encouragement. Each acknowledgement ignited a deeper layer of conviction within Tom. The voices growing around him were a ripple against a monolith, and he had triggered the quake. Richard's eyes narrowed, understanding dawning that this wasn't a mere office disagreement, it was the inception of a movement, however small, to question the untouchable elite. There was an epiphany in the air, suspended like the breath held by the crowd. Tom sensed a transformation not just of himself, but of everything around him. He pushed forward, ready to leverage this opportunity, unaware of the impending repercussions. What if this confrontation opened doors he never knew existed? And yet, as hope fused with anxiety, the looming question pulsed within him, would he be prepared for the retaliation that might follow? The confrontation simmered, and in the depths of the exchange, Tom steeled himself for what was yet to unfold. Could this be his battle cry, or would it catalyze his downfall? The stakes had never loomed higher, and as he held Richard's gaze with unwavering resolve, Tom knew that crossing this threshold would change everything. The time had come to face whether he was ready to confront not just Richard, but the entire corporate machine waiting to throw its weight against anyone daring to challenge it. The tension hung heavy in the room, an electric charge pulsing through Tom as he held Richard's gaze. Each breath he took felt labyrinthine, twisting through the core of his resolve. He had taken a step into uncharted territory, and the weight of that leap pressed upon him. Could he harness the burgeoning energy surrounding him? The atmosphere buzzed not merely with the threat of confrontation but also with the potential for change, an arena where his voice might reverberate far beyond the sterile walls of the boardroom. His heart raced, and Tom perceived a flicker of doubt in Richard's eyes, a rare moment of chink in the armor. He considered the implications. Was this a vulnerability or merely a strategic countermeasure? The room seemed to contract around them, isolating the two men in a silent battle of wills. What's at stake here, Richard? Tom ventured, his voice steady yet laced with an urgency that surprised even him. You oversee a ship sailing towards the iceberg, and yet you refuse to change course. Every decision you make ripples beyond your ledger into the lives of everyone in this company. Richard's glare held fast, but Tom could sense something shifting within him, an intangible promise that perhaps, just perhaps, the hardened facade could fracture. The moment had arrived. Tom could either double down on his burgeoning strength or retreat back into the shadows of conformity that had defined him for too long. Fear settled deep within him, a fear of reprisal, judgment, isolation. But alongside that fear simmered a truth, one he'd internalized through years of silent observation. True strength was born from vulnerability. Each moment of silence spun into an eternity as Tom seized the chance to speak to everyone in the room. People here are worried about their families, their futures. It's easy to overlook those realities from up high, but remember, at the end of the day, the foundation of this company is built on people like me, people like your employees who rely on this organization not just for a paycheck, but for dignity. He felt a stirring in the crowd, a gradual acknowledgement rippling across the faces of his co-workers. Rick from accounting, Sarah from HR, even Jonathan from logistics, each one of them understood the stakes now in ways they hadn't dared to voice before. The rising tide of solidarity rekindled hope within him, a flame he struggled to keep alive when darkness threatened to envelop his resolve. Tom took a breath and prepared to escalate his impact. You cannot silence the whispers of discontent forever, Richard. Just as you can count your bottom line, so can we count on you to listen to recognize us not as numbers on a balance sheet but as vital contributors to this organization? His voice resounded like a rallying cry, resonating within him, pushing against the walls of self-doubt previously surrounding him. Richard's expression began to shift. Tom discerned a tightening of the jaw, an indication that his words were piercing deeper than anticipated. What if this was more than just a verbal sparring match? What if Tom could expose the trepidation underlying Richard's stoicism? He pressed forward, determined not to relent. You know the truth, he continued, his voice rising. Your empire rests on our backs. Will you be the guy who chooses profit over people? Or will you stand with us, support those who give their all to this company, the same company that continually threatens to discard them? Before Richard could retort, Tom's heartbeat sank to the reactions of others who sat behind their screens, now fully present, eyes brightened with purpose and shared determination. Their support was a tether bolstering him against Richard's looming authority. However, amidst this newfound clarity, a chilling sense settled within Tom. The road ahead promised uncertainty. Would Richard retaliate in equal measure? Would the confrontation escalate to consequences Tom couldn't yet fathom? The stirring around him was invigorating, yet the stakes felt daunting. The moment crystallized as Richard's lips pressed into a thin line, a silent recognition that this was no longer just business as usual. The revelation dawned on Tom: he was not just a janitor revisiting his place in the corporate hierarchy, he was an agent of disruption. The gambling game of power shifted, and Tom was no longer an unwilling participant. He had entered the arena. As the silence morphed into restless anticipation, Tom absorbed the gravity of what lay ahead. Each second pulsed forward, urging him on, beckoning him toward the unknown. The battle had truly begun, and with it came the realization: true transformation was about to unfold. In that uncertainty, a single thought emerged stronger than the rest: would he be the one to lead the charge, or would this moment shatter him into pieces? The silence in the room pulsed like a heartbeat, each second stretching into an eternity. Tom could feel the collective breath being held, the weight of expectation heavy on his shoulders. Richard's icy demeanor began to thaw, and for the first time, Tom felt a flicker of hope, a flicker that could either ignite a blaze of change or crumble into ash. What do you want from me? Richard finally spat, frustration cutting through his bravado. The question pierced the tension, a pivot point in the confrontation. This was more than a call for respect, it was a clarion call for accountability, and perhaps, just perhaps, a recognition of the pain and struggle that lay beyond the spreadsheets. I want acknowledgement, Tom shot back, his voice sharper now, emboldened by the flickering courage ignited inside him. I want you to see us, to understand that our work is not just output on a ledger but a commitment to this community, even when that commitment is met with disregard. Richard's grip on his pen strengthened, knuckles whitening as he wrestled with the uncomfortable reality Tom had thrust into the light. Confusion flared briefly in his eyes before he masked it behind a steely facade. Would he bristle at the challenge presented, or could he adapt, evolve? The bystanders, the employees shifted, caught between fear and exhilaration as if Tom's words were a spell binding them in newfound solidarity. Heads nodded cautiously, eyes flickering with understanding. Could this moment break the chains that had held them back? As Richard let out a slow, calculated breath, Tom wondered if he had overstepped his bounds. Doubt preyed upon his mind, whispering that he had pushed too far, but a deeper voice insisted that this was the moment where he would either rise or fall. Despite the shaking in his hands, he pressed on. You have the power to change things, Tom urged, leaning forward. To be more than a CEO who merely governs. You have the opportunity to lead by example, to show us that profits do not have to come at the expense of people. For a heartbeat, the room hung in suspension, the gravity of their situation weighing heavily. Would anyone else dare to continue pushing for change? A ripple of quiet agreement spread through the crowd, emboldening him further. Unconsciously, he rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit, but he swiftly corrected himself, refocusing. He was not here to negotiate terms, he was here to demand the respect everyone in this room was owed. Richard opened his mouth to respond, but instead, he slammed a palm down on the table. "You think yelling will solve anything?" His voice boomed like thunder, but behind it lingered a tremor Tom couldn't ignore. There was fear there, but also the potential for transformation. How could Tom exploit that unease without going too far? "I think it's time we stopped accepting complacency for fear. We can't just let this ship sink," Tom countered, voice steady despite the self-doubt gnawing at his core. "You don't want loyalty built on fear. That only breeds resentment, and we're all feeling it. Let us transform this organization together." The tension transformed into a whirlwind of emotions that swirled amongst colleagues, quietly pivoting the atmosphere from apprehension to potential partnership. Faces softened, and Tom could see something changing. He wasn't just a janitor, he was advocating for something deeper, a mutual respect long forgotten. While Richard's expression remained inscrutable, Tom decided it was time to pivot his strategy. He needed to appeal to the man rather than his title. "You know I'm right, Richard." You felt the discontent growing. "You don't want to go down as the guy who ignored the warnings. So, let's do something different. Reach out. Talk to us." Time ticked on, and the battle seemed to etch into ingrained patterns of thought. Would Richard concede? Would he even entertain Tom's ideas, or would this explosive confrontation ultimately favor the status quo? Those prospects hung heavily in Tom's mind, but all he knew was that submission was no longer an option. As everyone waited with bated breath, sensing a decision loomed on the horizon, a sense of finality washed over Tom. The stakes had just elevated. He was no longer merely an instigator, he was an instigator with a cause, one that intertwined their fates. Would Richard step into the light of collaboration and acknowledge his employees as more than just cogs in the machine? A sudden thought struck Tom as he felt his breath catch in the stillness. Was Richard more afraid of the change itself, or was it the unexpected consequences that would follow a true collaboration? Moments ticked by, and the choice loomed closer. Would they forge a new path, or would they retreat into familiar neglect? Tomorrow would come, but would it dawn on a new company? How could Tom harness this moment to seize the narrative and make change ripple through the organization? The road ahead remained obscured by uncertainty, but one thing was clear: the tide was turning. And with that realization came an undeniable truth: the real battle was about to begin. The silence broke like glass, sharp and sudden. Tom felt the cold air shift, a palpable tension forming a barrier between him and Richard. He knew that words alone weren't enough, actions were the true measure of intentions. But before he could strategize his next steps, Richard's gravelly voice cut through the thought. "Change? You think you can just demand change? This isn't a charity, it's a business." Richard's frustration now appeared less controlled, more vulnerable. Tom saw the crack in the facade, a momentary glimpse of uncertainty. Is it a business if it crumbles? Emotions aren't polished on a balance sheet, but they are what drive productivity and loyalty. That can't be ignored, Tom pressed, feeling the momentum shift as he let the unyielding passion in his chest rise to the surface. Each word served as a reminder that real strength lay in shared responsibility, in a foundation built on mutual trust. Slowly, the employees rallied around him, whispered words of support fluttering like loose papers in the wind. Here they were, tired of the years of hardship, of feeling like shadows in a building meant for them. Could Richard see this? Would he understand the depth of their plight? In the back of his mind, Tom grappled with a rising fear: what if he miscalculated? What if pushing any further only led to a more substantial backlash? But his resolve quaked against that fear. There, within Richard, lay an untapped potential for empathy. "Let me show you what change could look like," Tom offered, his voice steadied by a newfound audacity. "What if we extended the conversation beyond this room? Open up a dialogue that reaches beyond upper management, gathers input from every level?" Tom's suggestion hung in the air, a challenge and an invitation. The room buzzed, murmurs of uncertainty mixing with intrigue. Richard glared at his employees, weighing their diverse faces before turning his icy gaze back to Tom. "Why would I? Richard countered, though Tom sensed the hint of curiosity beneath his defensiveness. Why would the people who have failed at their jobs suddenly have insights worth hearing? What evidence do you have to support this ridiculous notion? I had a thought that started as a whisper in my heart, Tom admitted, his grip on the podium tightening as he searched for clarity amidst the chaos of vulnerability. What if we surveyed everyone, and I mean everyone, creating a platform where each role is valued equally? In this way, the entire operation can thrive together. Richard shifted, his brow furrowing as he processed Tom's proposition. The opportunity to shake the foundations of the age-old hierarchy loomed before him. Did he dare venture into this unknown territory? Was he driven by fear or the desire for growth? Tom could see the turbulence in Richard's eyes, a storm brewing on the horizon of resistance and acceptance. A trickle of hope sparked through Tom, but he understood that ideas weren't enough. He needed a plan, something he could present to Richard to lay out the framework of potential evolution. He envisioned a series of workshops, town hall meetings, or perhaps even innovative brainstorming retreats that would invite voices from every corner, voices that had gone unheard for far too long. "I'll take that challenge on," Tom asserted, a growing determination crystallizing inside him. "I'll lead the charge in gathering perspectives, and I'll present the findings. In essence, your decision will be based on the shared pulse of this workplace." Richard leaned back in his chair, crossed arms signaling deep contemplation. The canvas of possibility lay vast before Tom, and the weight of the opportunity threatened to crush him, yet he stood resolute. Relying on the collective insight from his colleagues could either strengthen their stance or expose vulnerabilities they never intended to confront. With every heartbeat, Tom questioned the next steps. Could he draw Richard into a meaningful collaboration, or would the divide only grow? Would this endeavor serve to unite them or unravel the fragile threads holding the organization together? As the silence settled back into place, Tom realized the stakes were higher than ever before. The real test was not just in the willingness of others, but in himself, and whether he could foster the momentum of this newfound courage into actionable plans. Tomorrow stood at his doorstep, heavy with promise and uncertainty. How could he ensure that this powerful moment found its rhythm in a long chorus of change? One choice would lead toward growth, the other toward despair. And as the heavy tension draped over the group, he knew, the real fight had only just begun. Tom stepped out of the boardroom, the weight of the conversation still hanging heavy on his shoulders. The murmurs behind him faded, yet the impact of the room echoed in his mind. He had stepped into uncharted territory, challenging someone as formidable as Richard. Uncertainty welled up within him, swirling with a fierce determination. He leaned against the cold, steel wall of the dimly lit corridor, breathing deeply in an effort to steady his racing heart. It felt as if he teetered on the edge of a precipice, where one wrong move could send everything crashing down. What if Richard's resistance hardened? What if Tom's employees expected more from him than he could deliver? The stakes had never felt this high. A flicker of inspiration ignited within him. A plan began to take shape. He would need more than just grand ideas, he needed actionable steps backed by something tangible. The thought of surveying his colleagues replaced the rising anxiety with a bubbling excitement. Each employee's voice could be a stone in the foundation of this new vision. But was he prepared to handle their truths, their grievances, and their hopes? Tom envisioned himself gathering the team, fostering an environment that encouraged raw honesty. Would he be ready to face the demons lurking in the shadows of their experiences? The realization hit him. This endeavor wasn't solely about gathering opinions, it was a plunge into human vulnerability. Admitting that one's job was unsatisfactory was no small feat, especially in a corporate environment where silence often equaled survival. A sudden determination pulsed through him as he headed toward his desk. He needed to draft the framework of the survey, what questions would elicit meaningful responses without putting anyone on the defensive. He understood that the tone and language had to be thoughtful, respectful. After all, he was not merely asking for feedback, he was inviting contributions to a new chapter. That night, he committed to late hours, fingers dancing across the keyboard, crafting questions designed to probe the heart of their organizational experience. How did employees feel within their roles? What obstacles hindered their growth? Did they feel recognized? Each question was an olive branch, a promise that their insights mattered. But during the solitary hours, shadowed doubt still loomed. What if no one took the survey seriously? What if Richard killed the prospect even before it took root? The fear sat uneasily with him, but the vision of a transformed workplace overshadowed those concerns. In his heart, a small voice whispered that the work had already begun. By striving for this shift, he was also engaging in a deeper journey, one of personal growth and resilience. This moment, precarious as it felt, could be the catalyst for profound change not only for others but for himself as well. Just as Tom leaned back in his chair with exhaustion, contemplating the next day's presentation, his phone buzzed unexpectedly. It was a message from an anonymous employee who had come across his proposed ideas and wanted to contribute more directly. A surge of adrenaline rushed through him as he read the words, "I believe we can do this together." Now, reinvigorated by an unforeseen ally, Tom felt a renewed sense of purpose. But the path ahead would be fraught with challenges. Could he harness this energy and bring Richard along for the journey? As he prepared to sleep, the flickering shadows danced across the walls of his mind, and he pondered what a conversation with Richard would entail when confronted with this collaborative spirit. The tension continued to ebb and flow around him like an unpredictable tide, leaving him with one burning question: would tomorrow mark the beginning of a transformative journey, or would it end in the chaos of rejection? The sunlight crept in through the slats of Tom's blinds, casting striped shadows across his desk. He awoke to the lingering sense of trepidation that had marred his dreams. Today was pivotal. He had committed to presenting his survey idea to Richard, and the thought sent a shiver down his spine. Last night's adrenaline had morphed into a heavy unease as the gravity of the task ahead began to settle in. With heavy steps, he made his way to the office, his mind racing with potential outcomes. Navigating the corporate landscape felt like walking a tightrope, with Richard as a looming hurricane waiting to uproot his carefully laid plans. What if Richard dismissed the survey outright? What if he turned Tom's daring proposal into a personal criticism? Each possibility darkened the edges of Tom's resolve, but he couldn't yield to fear. As he arrived, he was greeted by a few employees who exchanged tentative smiles. It was a subtle reminder of the stakes involved in this initiative. These faces represented hopes and frustrations, potentially igniting a collective spark of change. He let their energy buoy him for a moment, focusing on the urgency of unveiling his vision. In the conference room, Tom paced nervously, rehearsing his points. Each step felt weighted with responsibility. He had to articulate not merely a survey but a genuine opportunity for dialogue, a chance to reclaim a sense of agency his colleagues might not even realize they craved. It was more than just another corporate initiative, it was a reclamation of their voices. The heavy door swung open, and Richard strode in, exuding an air of authority. Tom swallowed hard, caught off guard by the imposing presence. He quickly gathered his composure, adjusting his posture to assert confidence. This was it. The moment of truth. He launched into his presentation, his voice steady yet imbued with passion. Richard, I believe we have an opportunity here to reshape our culture. By engaging our employees directly, we can foster an atmosphere of innovation and collaboration. He felt the rhythm of his words begin to align with his heartbeat, gaining momentum as he painted a vision that aimed beyond profit margins. Richard listened, his brow furrowed in concentration. But Tom, he interjected, what if they provide feedback that undermines our current framework? These collaborative experiments often lead to chaos. I've seen it before. The challenge struck Tom like a jolt of electricity. He had anticipated resistance, but the sheer weight of it from Richard ignited a flicker of resolve within him. If we avoid this risk, we risk stagnation. Complacency can erode our foundation just as easily as criticism. Richard's gaze remained piercing, a mix of skepticism and curiosity. And what if your survey doesn't yield the results you hope for? Are you prepared to handle the fallout? The question hung thick in the air, and Tom inhaled deeply, grappling with the enormity of it. He had to settle his own fears before convincing Richard. I've accepted that the truth can be uncomfortable. I'm ready to face any outcomes. Understanding where we stand is the first step toward genuine improvement. Richard's expression flickered for a brief moment, a microsecond of consideration. Was there a crack in his steely facade? Before Tom could dwell on it, Richard leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Let us assume for a moment I consider this. What is your plan for executing the survey? Relief mixed with exhilaration coursed through Tom. This was an opening, an opportunity to sink into the next phase of his vision. He outlined his strategy, a rollout plan, anonymity assurances, and protocols for addressing feedback constructively. Each point he made was not just an item on a list, it was a lifeline thrown to both his employees and Richard, a plea for partnership. But the deeper Tom delved into his proposal, the tension in the room became palpable. Richard's passive resistance was not merely a business tactic, it was revealed as a defensive mechanism rooted in fear of change itself. As Tom concluded, he could feel the weight of the conversation shift. They were no longer in conflict, they were navigating the edges of collaboration. Despite the potential breakthrough, Tom felt an unsettling sense of escalation. Could he truly shift Richard's paradigm? Let us reconvene tomorrow to discuss this further, Richard said, his tone suddenly weary. In that moment, Tom understood they were both at a crossroads. One decision could reshape the corporate landscape they operated within. With that haunting thought of uncertainty, Tom walked out of the room, adrenaline still thrumming in his veins. If he was about to face a colossal confrontation with Richard, perhaps the real battle lay ahead. Would he have the courage to confront not only Richard but also the deeply ingrained fears that held them both captive? As he stepped into the bustling office filled with ambivalent energy, the realization settled, each day was a frame in a larger narrative he was desperate to write. A haunting thought lingered at the fringes of his mind: would tomorrow provide the revelations he sought, or would it expose the very fractures he feared? The next morning dawned with a dull gray hue, as if the sky reflected Tom's apprehensive thoughts. He arrived at the office early, hoping to gather his thoughts before facing Richard again. The concept of a survey still buzzed through his mind, but the underlying fear of confrontation encircled him like a noose. What if Richard rejected him outright? What if his colleagues remained indifferent? The very idea of his proposal left him feeling exposed and vulnerable. Once seated at his desk, Tom's fingers hovered over the keyboard. He felt a surge of determination mixed with dread, but he resisted the urge to retreat. Instead, he focused on clarifying his mission. Today wasn't just about pushing for change, it was about possibility. His colleagues deserved the opportunity to voice their opinions, to help shape the workplace culture that had entrapped them for too long. He glanced at the clock, the seconds ticking away like a metronome counting down toward a critical performance. Each tick underscored the weight of the moment ahead. Suddenly, he remembered Richard's hesitation during the meeting yesterday. The brief flicker of contemplation on Richard's face wasn't just doubt, it was an open window. Perhaps exposing those vulnerabilities might bridge the gap between them, initiating a dialogue of growth instead of conflict. As the office filled, Tom's mind raced with strategies. He decided to focus not only on the logistics of the survey but on the emotional and relational needs of the employees. Rather than framing the survey as an initiative driven by top management, he would present it as a vehicle of empowerment for all employees, a chance for unified expression. When Richard walked through the office doors, he exuded his usual authority, oblivious to the tremors of anxiety surging through Tom's gut. They entered the conference room where the atmosphere felt different, charged with anticipation. Tom could see the flicker of interest in Richard's eyes as he settled into a chair, signaling a subtle shift in the dynamic. Tom began by shifting the focus, asking, "What were your thoughts after our last conversation? Do you see any merit in the way we approach this with our team?" The question hung in the air, carefully poised, inviting Richard to share his apprehensions. Richard paused, his expression guarded. "I recognize that employee engagement is essential, but we must remember the business objectives. What if the feedback we receive disrupts our direction?" His words dripped with concern, yet Tom didn't flinch. What if the lack of feedback is what undermines our objectives? Tom countered, conviction swelling within him. We risk making decisions that only resonate with a few at the top. The survey could serve as a compass. It would guide us, rather than derail us. Richard shifted slightly in his chair, the tension easing just a fraction. Tom seized the moment, leaning forward. This isn't merely about listening, Richard. It's about enabling radical transparency that could enrich our strategies, not debilitate them. The survey could uncover insights we may not realize we desperately need. The atmosphere thickened as Richard contemplated Tom's assertion. Tom pressed on, fueled by an internal urgency. What if we committed to using that feedback constructively? Genuinely involved our employees in the decision-making that shapes their work environment? Tom's voice steadied, echoing with sincerity. The tension in the room began to alter, as the barriers holding Richard captive seemed to crack. I know it's not easy to assess the unknown, Tom continued, but imagine the sense of ownership our team would feel. Wouldn't that foster a culture of accountability? Richard's gaze softened momentarily, eyes searching for understanding, as if wrestling with the concept. Tom seized the opportunity to address a deeper fear within him, the fear of vulnerability in leadership that could come from accepting feedback. The conversation shifted and deepened, moving beyond mere logistical constraints into a realm of emotional resonance. Tom felt his own courage swell, shattering any remnants of self-doubt. After what felt like hours, Richard finally sighed deeply. You may have a point, Tom. I can see the potential of bringing our employees into the fold. The fear of chaos is deeply ingrained in me, but I feel it might be worth exploring. Tom's heart raced as the energy in the room subtly transformed. It felt electric. They were on the precipice of something significant. With the enticing prospect on the horizon, Tom wondered how far this shift would extend. As they discussed the framework for the survey, the real conversation lay submerged, waiting to surface the reveal of their individual vulnerabilities. The session wrapped up with a cautious optimism, but as Tom watched Richard leave, he noticed the shadows still lingering in his eyes. Beneath the corporate mask lay fear of the unknown, both as a leader and a human being. The seed of a revelation sprouted in Tom's mind. Could this moment act as a catalyst, not just for the survey, but for Richard as well? As he leaned back in his chair, his mind whirled with possibilities. This was merely the beginning. What awaited tomorrow was uncertain, but one thing was becoming undeniable: the path to organizational change could very well lead to personal awakenings, entangling them both in ways they never expected. What unseen challenges in their anticipation could potentially transform this journey into something far greater? The following morning, Tom awoke with renewed determination. The meeting with Richard yesterday sparked a shift in the dynamics that had long been stagnant. They were no longer adversaries. They were collaborators grappling with the same core human concern: how to preserve the integrity of their workplace while acknowledging the voices that had been silenced for far too long. As Tom sipped his coffee, he reflected on the path ahead. His initial fears of rejection had morphed into a resilient belief in what they could collectively achieve. He envisioned the survey taking shape. It was not merely a mechanism for feedback but an opportunity to forge a deeper connection between management and employees. Each data point carried the weight of a life affected, each story a thread in the fabric of their organizational landscape. At the office, the atmosphere buzzed with a palpable sense of anticipation, even trepidation. Tom facilitated a small meeting with a group of employees to discuss the survey he envisioned. It became an informal brainstorming session where everyone felt free to share their thoughts. He encouraged candidness, stressing the importance of inclusivity. Our voices matter, he reminded them, feeling a wave of solidarity wash over the room. This is not just about changing policies. It's about creating an environment where we can thrive, where each of us feels valued, regardless of title or role. The enthusiasm was infectious. Ideas flowed, and together they crafted questions that addressed personal experiences, struggles, and aspirations. Through this joint effort, Tom felt the collective resolve of his colleagues strengthening his own. Everyone was eager to lift each other, and the chemistry in the room became a hotbed of innovation. Their collaborative spirit mirrored the mission he had set forth, and as the meeting concluded, the atmosphere was electric. They had outlined a significant step toward empowerment, and Tom's heart swelled with pride. This wasn't just a task, it was a movement. After the meeting, Tom approached Richard's office, an outline of the survey draft in hand. The shift he witnessed in Richard yesterday resonated with him. He could feel the tension stringing along the corridor, a blend of hope and apprehension as he knocked on the door. "Come in," Richard's voice responded, slightly softer than usual. "Can we discuss the draft for the employee feedback survey?" Tom ventured, noticing Richard's brow furrow as he gestured to a chair. As Tom laid out their ideas, he felt Richard's skepticism begin to thaw, an openness blooming. "This is not just a corporate routine," Tom asserted. "This is a chance for our employees to engage and contribute meaningfully." Richard listened, his expression shifting from guardedness to contemplation. "You know, Tom," he finally spoke, "I've always viewed employee feedback as a risk. What if it undermines my authority? What if it opens a floodgate of complaints?" Tom squared his shoulders, meeting Richard's gaze. "But what if we learn how to serve our employees better? What if this insight strengthens your position, allowing you to lead with informed intent instead of guesswork?" Richard paused, a flicker of recognition passing through his eyes. "You're right. I've been shackled by my own fears and perceptions. This could actually create a channel for dialogue. It's about making informed decisions, not just maintaining control." As they worked through the logistics, Tom found himself in a newfound rhythm with Richard. It was exhilarating, almost surreal, and it became apparent that they were developing not only a survey but also a bridge, one that connected their disparate struggles and grew into a shared vision. Weeks passed, and the survey was a resounding success. Feedback poured in, unveiling layers of insight that had long been dormant within the organization. Employees spoke not only of their challenges but also their passions and suggestions. Richard and Tom sat together, analyzing the outcomes. The data presented a clear narrative, one that echoed the voices of those who had long been unheard. As changes began to take shape based on the feedback, a noticeable shift in company culture emerged. Meetings transformed from unilateral declarations into collaborative brainstorming sessions. Employees began to share their aspirations without fear, and the power dynamics that once strained relationships dissolved into a more inclusive environment. The apex of Tom's journey came one afternoon when Richard called for a company-wide meeting. Standing shoulder to shoulder with Tom, they addressed the entire organization, sharing the results of the survey and the actionable steps that would follow. Richard spoke candidly, acknowledging that their previous approaches had neglected to consider the value of their people. His vulnerability echoed loudly in the room, met with a resounding applause from those present. Tom felt an overwhelming sense of pride not only for the progress made but for the understanding that had emerged between them. As the applause faded, a sense of triumph washed over Tom. He had evolved from a janitor, uncertain in shadows, to a catalyst for change, his name now associated with innovation and advocacy. Tom proved that one voice could dismantle barriers, and as Richard officially recognized his efforts, Tom found his place securely within an organization transformed. The office had become a ground for growth for individuals and the collective. No longer overshadowed, both he and his colleagues stepped into their potential, forging ahead with solid confidence and recognized competence. Now, with purpose established and pathways paved for continued collaboration, Tom knew this was just the beginning. He had succeeded not only in driving significant change but in claiming his power through authenticity, earning a seat at the table for both himself and those whose voices had once been silenced. And as Tom glanced around the room, he realized one undeniable truth: he had taken the risk, confronting a culture of silence, and emerged not only as a participant but as a leader. The injustice he had once feared now fueled his resolve to ensure that no voice would ever go unheard again. You need to subscribe now to our channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. This is the moment to show your support by leaving a like to feed the algorithm. Comment below with your reaction and theories about the ending. Don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion.